Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519, was a towering figure of the Italian Renaissance, known not only as being an artist, but an inventor and a scientist whose curiosity spanned multiple disciplines. Beyond painting, he filled notebooks with engineering sketches, fascinating scientific diagrams, and anatomical studies, which all reflect his relentless pursuit of knowledge and innovative approaches to understanding the world. His legacy extends beyond the realm of art. His visionary inventions and discoveries in fields such as anatomy, optics, and hydraulics anticipated many modern technologies. So, let's learn about his life today. Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're coming back, it's good to see you again. And if you're completely new, then it's good to meet you. If you'd like to support the channel, links to the Patreon are in description. Otherwise, if you like the video, you'll certainly have my heartfelt thanks. This helps YouTube push it out to a broader audience. Thank you in advance for liking the video. Now, let's get on with it. The life of Leonardo da Vinci. Please, make yourself comfortable. Leonardo da Vinci, born Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci, was born on April 15th, 1452, either in or near the Tuscan hill town of Vinci, approximately 20 miles from Florence. He was the illegitimate son of a man named Piero da Vinci, a Florentine legal notary, and Caterina de Meo Lippi, who hailed from the lower class. Now, the exact location of his birth remains a little bit uncertain, but according to a traditional account recorded by the historian Emanuele Repetti, he was born in Anciano, a secluded country hamlet that provided the privacy for his illegitimate birth. However, some speculate that he may have been born in a house in Florence that belonged to San Piero. Now, following Leonardo's birth, his parents married other individuals and went their separate ways. Caterina, identified as Caterina Buti del Vaca, married a local artisan named Antonio di Piero Buti del Vaca. Ser Piero married Albiera Amadori, whom he had been betrothed to the previous year. After Albiera's death in 1464, Ser Piero went on to marry 3 more times. Well, Leonardo himself grew up alongside 16 half-siblings, of whom 11 survived infancy. However, he had very little contact with them, as they were much younger than him, with the last being born when Leonardo was 46. And in terms of his childhood, very little concrete information exists, and much of what is known is obscured by myth, in part due to Giorgio Vasari's biography in Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, originally released in 1550, which often contains rather apocryphal stories. Gotta sell some books, right? Now, there is tax records that indicate Leonardo lived in his paternal grandfather Antonio da Vinci's household by at least 1457. But it's possible he spent his early years under the care of his mother in Vinci, either in Anciano or Camposepi in the parish of San Pantaleone. He likely had a close relationship with his uncle, Francesco da Vinci, but his father, Sarpiero, was likely in Florence most of the time. Now Sarpiero, belonging to a long line of notaries, established a residence in Florence by at least 1469, and enjoyed a fairly successful career. Despite his family's background, Leonardo received only a basic and comparatively informal education, focusing primarily on vernacular writing, reading, and mathematics. It's speculated, however, that his family did recognize his artistic talents earlier on and decided to prioritize them. But we don't know how this was done. It's simply suggested in the works of Giorgio Vasari. Well, in his later years, Leonardo recorded his earliest memory in the Codex Atlanticus. He recounted an incident from his infancy when a kite came to his cradle and opened his mouth with its tail. There's ongoing debate among commentators about whether this anecdote was an actual memory or simply a fantasy. Well, by the mid-1460s, Leonardo's family relocated to Florence, which was then a hub of Christian humanist thought and also cultural activity. At around the age of 14, he began working as a garzone, or studio boy, in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, the leading painter and sculptor in Florence at the time. This period coincided with the death of Donatello, Verrocchio's master. Leonardo progressed to become an apprentice by the age of 17, and continued his training under Verrocchio for 7 years. Notable artists who either apprenticed in Verrocchio's workshop or were associated with it include Ghirlandaio, Perugino, Botticelli, and Lorenzo di Credi. Also, if I pronounce any of the Italian names wrong, I do apologize, and I mean no disrespect. I'm doing my very best with them. Thank you for your patience. Well, during his time with Verrocchio, Leonardo received comprehensive training in both theoretical principles and practical skills. Verrocchio really took him under the wing, and it was time to turn this young lad into a Renaissance man. He learned various technical disciplines, such as drafting, metalworking, chemistry, plaster casting, mechanics, woodworking, and leatherworking, in addition to artistic techniques like drawing, painting, sculpting, and modeling. Very busy schedule indeed. Leonardo was contemporaneous with renowned artists like the aforementioned Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, and Perugino, though they were slightly older than him. He likely encountered them also at the workshop of Verrocchio, or perhaps at the Platonic Academy of the Medici. Florence boasted numerous artworks by artists such as Masaccio and Ghiberti, whose works displayed realism, emotion, and intricate architectural backgrounds. Piero della Francesca's studies in perspective and scientific examination of light also influenced Leonardo's own artistic development. In Verrocchio's workshop, much of the painting was executed by assistants. According to Vasari, Leonardo collaborated with Verrocchio on the Baptism of Christ, showcasing his superior skill in painting the angel holding Jesus' robe. And if you haven't seen it, really, go and have a look. It's a beautiful painting. It is said that Verrocchio was so taken back and impressed by Leonardo's talent that he himself decided to simply give up painting. Although this is probably just an apocryphal story. Could have happened though. Leonardo may have also served as a model for some of Verrocchio's works, such as the bronze statue of David and the Archangel Raphael in Tobias and the Angel. Vasari recounts a story from Leonardo's youth, when a local peasant requested a shield to be painted. Leonardo, inspired by the tale of Medusa, created a terrifying image of a monster spitting fire. Well, apparently, the shield was so impressive that his father decided to keep it for himself and sold a different one back to the peasant. Leonardo's painting was eventually sold to a Florentine art dealer for 100 ducats, who then sold it to the Duke of Milan. Now, by 1472, at the age of 20 years old, he had already done so much, and he was getting good at absolutely everything. You know, one of those people who just seem to not make any mistakes, who just seem to breeze through. In my country, we call them a Terry Too Good. He was certainly one of them. And by this age of 20, he achieved the status of master in the Guild of St. Luke, the esteemed guild of artists and doctors of medicine. Despite being established in his own workshop by his father, he maintained a strong attachment to Verrocchio, continuing to collaborate and live in with him. Leonardo's earliest known dated work, a pen and ink drawing from the Arno Valley of 1473, showcases some very early talent. Vasari credits Leonardo with being the first to propose the idea of making the Arno River navigable between Florence and Pisa as well. It's just another little idea that he had while he was down there. Moving on to January 1478, when Leonardo received an independent commission to paint the altarpiece for the chapel of St. Bernard in the Palazzo Vecchio, indicating his growing independence from Verrocchio's studio. An anonymous biographer, Anonimo Gadiano, claims that in 1480 Leonardo was residing with the Medici and frequented the garden of Piazza San Marco, where a Neoplatonic academy organized by the Medici gathered. In the March of 1481, he received another commission from the monks of San Donato in Scopeto for the adoration of the Magi. However, both of these initial projects were abandoned when Leonardo decided to offer his services to the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. Leonardo wrote Sforza a letter detailing his skills in engineering, weapon design, and painting, and he presented the Duke with a unique silver string instrument shaped like a horse's head, which was most likely either a lute or a kind of lyre. Through his association with Alberti, Leonardo gained access to the home of the Medici, where he became acquainted with the prominent humanist philosopher, such as Marsiglio Ficini, Cristoforo Landino, and John Argyropoulos. He also interacted with the brilliant young poet and philosopher Pico del Mirandola. Back in 1482, Leonardo was sent as an ambassador by Lorenzo de' Medici to Ludovico il Moro, the ruler of Milan from 1479 to 1499. And this was a very significant turning point in Leonardo's career, as he sought new opportunities and patronage in the city of Milan. During his time in Milan from 1482 to 1499, Leonardo undertook several significant commissions and projects. He was commissioned to create masterpieces such as the Virgin on the Rocks for the Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception, and the Last Supper for the monastery of Santa Maria del Grazie. In the spring of 1485, Leonardo traveled to Hungary on behalf of Ludovico Sforza to meet King Matthias Corvinus, who commissioned him to paint a Madonna. Additionally, in 1490 he served as a consultant, alongside Francesco di Giorgio Martini, for the construction of the Cathedral of Pavia, where he was inspired by the equestrian statue of Regisol, leaving behind a sketch. Leonardo worked on various projects for Sforza, including floats and pageants for special occasions, a drawing and wooden model for a competition to design the cupola for Milan Cathedral, and a model for a colossal equestrian monument to Ludovico's predecessor, Francesco Sforza, known as the Gran Cavallo. Although Leonardo completed a model for the horse and detailed plans for its castings, Ludovico diverted the metal intended for the statue to build a cannon to defend the walls from Charles VIII of France in November 1494. I mean, priorities, right? Additionally, contemporary correspondence reveals that Leonardo and his assistants were tasked by the Duke of Milan to paint the Sala del Asse in Sforza Castle around 1498. This project involved creating a trompe-l'oeil decoration that transformed the Great Hall into a pergola, featuring intertwined mulberry trees with an intricate canopy of leaves and knots in the ceiling, showcasing Leonardo's mastery of perspective and also illusionistic techniques. After Ludovico Sforza was ousted by France in 1500, Leonardo fled for Venice, accompanied by his assistant Salai and the mathematician Luca Pacioli. In Venice, he worked as a military architect and engineer, devising defensive strategies against naval attacks. Upon returning to Florence in 1500, Leonardo and his household were hosted by the Servite monks at the monastery of Santissima Annunziata, where he created the cartoon of the Virgin and Child of Saint Anne and St. John the Baptist, which garnered immense and widespread admiration. In 1502, Leonardo entered the service of Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI, serving as a military architect and engineer. He traveled throughout Italy with Borgia, creating maps of strategic locations and designing structures such as dams. Leonardo left Borgia's service and returned to Florence in the early of 1503, rejoining the Guild of St. Luke and commencing work on the iconic portrait of Lisa del Giocondo, also known as the Mona Lisa. In 1504, he participated in a committee to decide the placement of Michelangelo's statue of David. He then spent the next 2 years in Florence working on the mural of the Battle of Anghiari for Signoria, alongside Michelangelo's The Battle of Cascina. By 1506, Leonardo was summoned back to Milan by Charles II d'Amboise, the French governor. While there, he took on Count Francesco Melzi as a pupil. Despite the Council of Florence's desire for him to return and finish the work of the Battle of Anghiari, Leonardo was granted leave by Louis XII of France to work on various projects, including a potential equestrian figure of d'Amboise. During his time in Milan, many prominent pupils, such as Bernardino Luini and Giovanni Antonio Bolterafio, studied or collaborated with him. By this time he was certainly becoming a teacher, and many people sought out his advice, whether it be for artistic pursuits or otherwise. In 1507, Leonardo was forced to travel back to Florence, and not on an artistic mission, but rather to resolve a dispute with his brothers over his recently deceased father's estate. By 1508, he returned to Milan, where he resided in his own house in Porta Orientale, in the parish of Santa Bibola. 4 years later, Leonardo began working on plans for an equestrian monument for Gian Giacomo Trivulzio, but these plans were halted due to an invasion by a confederation of Swiss, Spanish, and Venetian forces, which drove the French from Milan. Despite the turmoil, Leonardo remained in the city, spending time in 1513 at the Medici's Vaprio di Ada villa. In March of 1513, Lorenzo de' Medici's son Giovanni became Pope Leo X. Leonardo then traveled to Rome in September of the same year, where he was received by the Pope's brother, Giuliano. He spent much of his time living in the Belvedere courtyard in the Apostolic Palace, alongside Michelangelo and Raphael. Leonardo received a monthly allowance from the Pope, and was engaged in various projects, including decorating a lizard with quicksilver-coated scales, and working on plans for draining the Pontine marshes. He also dissected cadavers and took notes for his anatomical studies. In the October of 1515, some 2 years later, King Francis I of France recaptured Milan, and Leonardo was present at the meeting between Francis I and Leo X in December of that year. In 1516, Leonardo entered Francis's service and was given the use of the manor house Clos-Luc near the king's residence at the royal Château d'Amboise. He drew plans for a castle town at Ramorantin and created a mechanical lion for a pageant attended by the king. During this period, Leonardo was accompanied by his friend and apprentice, Francesco Melzi, and received a pension. At some point, Melzi had drawn a portrait of Leonardo, and there are other sketches and records from this time, including accounts of Leonardo being paralyzed in his right hand. Not good for an artist. Well, despite the health issues, he continued to work until he became bedridden for several months. And then Leonardo da Vinci passed away at Cloluce on May the 2nd, 1519, at the age of 67 and possibly due to a stroke. His close friend, King Francis I, was with him in his final moments, and according to Vasari, Leonardo expressed remorse for not fully dedicating himself to his art. He received the last rites and confession before passing away. Legend has it that King Francis himself cradled Leonardo's head as he breathed his last breath, and his funeral procession included 60 beggars carrying tapers, as per his will. He left his belongings to his principal heir and executor, Francesco Melzi, including his paintings, tools, library, and some personal effects. Melzi's companions, Salai and Baptista de Villanis, also received their shares of Leonardo's estate. His remains were interred at the Collegiate Church of Saint Florentine at the Château d'Amboise. 20 years after his death, King Francis I remarked on his unparalleled knowledge, not only in the arts, but also in philosophy. Leonardo's longtime assistant, Salai, remained in his household, despite his misdemeanors, and executed paintings under the name Andrea Salai, which you can look up and take a look at. They're pretty good. Although Leonardo taught him much about painting, Salai's work is considered of lesser quality than that of other students. And at the time of his death, in 1524, Salai owned a painting referred to as Gioconda, which was valued highly in a posthumous inventory of his belongings. But we're not here to learn about Salai, aren't we? Let's hear a little bit more about the personal life of Leonardo. And of course, a lot of it's going to come from Vasari, so don't be too surprised. Well, Leonardo was depicted by his early biographers as, of course, a man possessing extraordinary personal charm, generosity, and also kindness towards everyone he met. He was widely admired by his contemporaries, with Vasari noting that, and I quote, Leonardo's disposition was so lovable that he commanded everybody's affection. He was also known for his wit in conversation, and he could apparently easily captivate others with the written word. Vasari offers another summarization of his character, stating, "His impressive presence brought solace to the troubled souls. He possessed such persuasive abilities that he could sway others to his will. He was exceedingly generous, ensuring that all his friends, regardless of their wealth, were well taken care of. His birth was a great boon to Florence, and his death left an immeasurable void." Here's another quote from Vasari. "In the ordinary course of events, many individuals are born with various talents and qualities. However, on occasion a person is endowed by nature in such abundance that they surpass all others. Leonardo da Vinci was widely acknowledged as one such individual, possessing not only remarkable physical beauty, but also an infinite grace in his endeavors. His genius was so profound that he effortlessly resolved any challenges he encountered. While working on the Last Supper, Leonardo had reportedly said, "Wine may be enjoyable, but water is preferable at the table. Small living spaces steer the mind in the right direction, while large ones lead it astray. Pursuing wealth excessively often results in a lack of enjoyment." He also penned the words, "Those who seek quick riches often meet swift downfall." Think about that one. Not bad. Now, Leonardo's philosophical musings were also evident in a series of fables he crafted for Ludovico Sfora's court. Presented as jests, labeled prophecies, these tales often warned against the perils of arrogance, emphasizing the virtues of humility, awareness, and diligence. Leonardo's playful side was apparent in his practical jokes, such as surprising acquaintances with a lizard adorned in those extravagant decorations crafted from quicksilver. In his treatise on painting, he even described a humorous trick involving setting a hall ablaze using incense smoke and a lit torch. I'm sure they didn't find that very humorous. Perhaps it's all subjective, just like art, right? Well, his personal life and his sexuality remain enigmatic. He left behind very little personal correspondence or documentation of romantic interests. Despite his extensive writings, there are no letters, no poems, and no diaries that indicate any romantic relationships at all. He never married, and it cannot be definitely stated whether he had intimate relationships with anyone, regardless of gender. Well, it certainly seems that he was dedicated to his work. He'd make a great Warhammer 40k hobbyist, I tell you that. However, art historian Raymond Stites suggested a romantic involvement with the one Cecilia Gallerani, the subject of his painting Lady with an Ermine. But of course, this is just speculation again. It could be just to simply fill in a gap within the information. Somebody wanted to write something to sort of give it some kind of explanation. So we don't really know. Now, we have a few little references to sexuality in general from his notebooks, which actually reflects somewhat of a negative and almost Puritan view. And it seems a little bit strange. And I'll read one of the quotes for you, and it goes like this. "The act of procreation, and anything that has any relation to it, is so disgusting that human beings would soon die out if there were no pretty faces and sensuous dispositions." Another quote suggests a preference for intellectual passion over sensuality. And it goes like this. "Intellectual passion drives out sensuality. Whoso curbs not lustful desires puts himself on a level with the beasts." Yikes. Well, it certainly explains why all of his pursuits were so thoroughly pursued. Perhaps he had quite a lot of free time. And it certainly makes you wonder about this alleged romantic involvement with Cecilia Gallerani that the historian Raymond Stites had suggested. If there was a romantic involvement, well, it seems that it may have been a little bit lukewarm, unless these quotes were just writings of a man who was having a bad day. Who knows? Now, the only historical record concerning Leonardo's sexual life is actually an accusation of sodomy that was made against him in 1476, when he was nearly 24 years old and still an apprentice in Verrocchio's workshop. The accusation, however, is dismissed due to insufficient evidence, which I don't know how you would find sufficient evidence of it, but it still remains a topic of speculation among scholars. Now, throughout history, the interpretations of his sexuality have varied. Some biographers suggest that he was actually homosexual, while others believe that he was simply celibate for much of his life. Elizabeth Abbott posited that the sodomy case could have traumatized him into celibacy. Perhaps so, maybe there's something to that. And guess who? Sigmund Freud actually put his 2 cents in, and he suggested a latent homosexuality, while others argue that he was actively homosexual. Evidence for it includes a comic illustration from 1495 and an erotic drawing of his assistant Sally. So why was he drawing things like that? Really makes you think. But the interpretations of these artworks and their significance in relation to Leonardo's sexuality, once again, it's all debatable. And despite the speculation, his personal life continues to be a subject of fascination, but also inquiry. Me? I personally think that it is perhaps a part of our modern historical revisionism, where we try and look at figures of the past and fit them into a box where it could perhaps represent our own personal inclinations. It's the same thing that happens with a lot of the Greek figures and lots of different people who simply did not want to get married. I think that if anything, we could perhaps put him into a category of asexual, just simply not interested. I mean, he was certainly busy enough with all of his projects, and I think that's probably what it was, and that's just my personal opinion. I think he just wanted to be left alone to do his art. Now, moving on from that, Vasari portrays Leonardo da Vinci's childhood as marked by exceptional talent, but also a restless curiosity. Despite being easily distracted, reportedly, he had showed remarkable progress in his studies, particularly in arithmetic. Throughout his youth, he had reportedly never ceased drawing, and his innate artistic abilities continued to improve. Recognizing his son's extraordinary talents, Leonardo's father took some of his drawings to Andrea del Verrocchio, that prominent artist, and that's how he got into the apprenticeship. He also learned while he was there to be a skilled geometrician, and Vasari notes that during his apprenticeship he crafted clay heads of smiling women and children, which remained popular even decades later. Now his early works, such as the Annunciation in the Uffizi, and his collaboration with Verrocchio on the baptism of Christ, certainly do exemplify this emerging talent. His diverse interests evident since childhood, are reflected in his journals, where he meticulously documented his scientific observations, experiments, and even his creative writing, including fables. It can't all be science, can't it? Now, regarding religion, although there is limited first-hand information about Leonardo's beliefs, historians generally consider him to be Catholic. He viewed God as a supreme being and expressed interest in Greek philosophy, particularly Plato and Aristotle. He respected religious texts like the Bible, while also questioning certain biblical narratives, such as the story of Noah's flood. But he also criticized pagan mythology, dismissing the notion of gods as celestial bodies and describing them as mortal and corrupt. According to Vasari, his musical talents were also evident from a young age, as he learned to play the lyre and demonstrated remarkable improvisational skills. Around 1479, he even crafted a lyre in the shape of a horse head, primarily made of silver, and it reportedly produced a very rich and resonant sound. When Lorenzo de' Medici sought to improve relations with Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, this was the lyre that Leonardo presented as a gift. In fact, his musical abilities reportedly outshone those of the court musicians, which greatly impressed the Duke. Additionally, it is believed that Leonardo was proficient in keyboard instruments like the virginal, and one of his inventions, the viola organista, was based on his designs from notebooks dating 1488 to 89 and the Codex Atlanticus. The instrument featured keys that, when pressed, caused strings to interact with rotating rosin-covered wheels. And just lastly, Leonardo's profound love for nature stemmed from his childhood surroundings, which included mountains, forests, rivers, and diverse wildlife. His exploration of the natural world influenced his interest in painting. His compassion for animals was also notable, as he questioned the morality of meat consumption when not essential for health. Both contemporary accounts and his notebooks document this love for animals, and it led to widespread belief that he was actually a vegetarian. He often freed caged birds he encountered for sale in Florence, paying for their release and allowing them to fly away. This empathy for animals and aversion to causing unnecessary suffering contributed to this vegetarian lifestyle. In his notebooks, Leonardo expressed concern for the well-being of animals in general, and critiqued the practice of consuming meat, advocating for compassion and ethical treatment of all living creatures. And with that, we end our talk on Leonardo da Vinci. I hope you enjoyed it. Bit of a different one today. I don't often do biographies, but it's fun. I would like to thank my Mega Chat tier patrons, Jeffrey, JC, and Stark Factory. Thank you very much, lads. And if you'd like to become a member of the Patreon, you need only follow the links in the description. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining me once more, and I will see you in the next video. Good night. Take care.